You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Good day and welcome to the Mushie Moment today on May 7th, 2024. We're here live on paceradio.net and many other places. Give me just a second.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Steve apparently has somebody knocking on his window, which has honestly never happened before. That's actually kind of funny.
That's never happened to me.
That's the first.
It's a gentleman from just down the road. He used a bunch of the black oil to get rid of cancer on his nose. And he's inquiring about the 7 mushroom blend and some of the other products to help him along the way.
Excellent. Excellent. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So how was your day?
So far, it's going incredibly well.
Strange people knocking on the window. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah. The phone's already been going off. It's a good day. It's beautiful and sunny, and it seems like things are a little more settled in the planetary solar area, or at least not bouncing right at this moment. And life is good. It's nice. I took Meek out for a nice walk already this morning. She enjoyed a bit of sun. It's a beautiful day.
Wicked. I had some fun over the weekend. I went to a tattoo convention here in Nova Scotia. And one of the tattoo artists that was set up there is the gentleman that I received my first tattoo from 30 some years ago. But yeah, he was there. He's 78 years old now. He still tattoos. He doesn't do much for designs, but he was there doing autographs for a lot of money. But he is one of the most worldwide famous tattoo artists of all times. Sailor Jerry. Some of you might have heard of his rum. Not that I promote rum, but some of you might have heard about his rum, Sailor Jerry. And so this is the man, the myth, the legend, and he autographed my first tattoo this past week, which is really cool. So my first tattoo was done by Sailor Jerry himself, and although he wasn't up for doing any retouches to it, he did sign it and add a second little mini anchor to the bottom of the Y, which is pretty cool.
Nice. Man, myth, and legend. We have one of those on our show today, too.
We do. The man, the myth, the legend. You can't be in any of this natural medicine without knowing who this man is. Everybody knows him. He fought for cannabis. He's currently fighting for mushrooms. He's got this amazing Coca. I keep doing that. Cafe in Vancouver. He's got a few cannabis dispensaries. He's got a few mushroom dispensaries. And he is just, downright a nice guy that fights for the rights to natural medicine.
Yes, he's been a very strong advocate and a very very prominent and loud person in the trying to change the way drugs are viewed and to end the drug war that is currently devastating North America.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy to have him on the show. It takes pretty big nads to keep going in there and fighting like that. And he gets raided, he gets taken down, he stands back up and goes, no, this is something I believe in, and this is a fight worth fighting. And I'm fucking honored to have him on the show.
Yeah, I've been able to tell by the way you've been sharing the advertising. It's been pretty beautiful. So welcome, Dana.
Hello,
Good
thank you
day.
for that lovely introduction.
We have a lot of respect for you. Lots and lots of
Well,
respect.
Yeah.
appreciate
So
that.
my first question is always one that seems to provoke some thought and some pretty good answers in the past. I want to know what got you started in this years ago. Like you've been this amazing, loud activist making differences and making changes for quite a while. But what was it that made you pay attention to this sector and made you decide that you needed to stand up and make a difference?
Well, about 35 odd years ago, when I was in my late teens, I started using cannabis and learning about the benefits and the hidden history. And I read the book The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which is kind of an oldie but a goodie. And a lot of people, I think, read that book and helped open their eyes to the truth about cannabis and a lot of the information that had been hidden. But for me, I saw quite quickly that it went beyond just cannabis. And although I do think that cannabis is wonderful and probably the world's greatest plant, I sort of saw that what we call the war on drugs is really a war on plants, and that coca leaves and opium poppies and psilocybe mushrooms and peyote cactus and all these different things are all also really wonderful plants with a great deal of historical, social, cultural, spiritual, religious, medicinal use around the world. And so my first kind of activist project, I started writing letters to members of parliament in Canada back in the late 1980s and keeping their answers in a binder that I had and sort of tracking those kind of conversations. And, for the since then, for 3.5 decades, it's been a pretty wild ride and quite a journey, but I've never seen anything to convince me otherwise that the truth that the war on drugs is a terrible, harmful, destructive policy that causes and worsens all of the problems it claims to be trying to solve. And so, I never thought this was going to be something easy to change. It's very deeply baked into our culture and into our world institutions at every level in every country. And if you want to be participating in the global network of countries, you've got to buy into the war on drugs or you are excluded and ostracized and attacked. We got cannabis legalized in Canada after a great deal of work. And of course, the legalization we got isn't perfect, but it is a monumental victory. But for me, it's always been more than that. And so I've been working on psychedelics for the last couple of years, but it goes beyond that as well. And really, the whole thing needs to be dismantled. I'm not sure we're going to see the real end of the war on drugs in my lifetime, but I think we're seeing the beginning of the end. And hopefully we can push things forward, but it's still many, many years away, if not decades away, of really dismantling this global policy, which has just caused so much harm and destruction and devastation on every level. So that's kind of my history and where it comes from. And the more I've learned and the more I've seen over the years, the more I've become convinced that we're in the right and that prohibition is really the policy that needs to end, and that prohibition and drug war are devastatingly harmful and deadly for millions, billions of people around the world.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Oh yeah, hands down. So when you look back, is there any one episode or any one event that actually triggered no, I need to step in and fight this?
Well, not really. I mean, I had a pretty privileged upbringing and everything, and to me, this is a nice way of giving back. I've enjoyed my work. I mean, there's definitely been challenges and losses and hard times in this conflict, and lost a lot of good people to drug issues and poisonings and things like that. But aside from that kind of thing, it's been a great journey. I've had the chance to do lots of different kinds of things: start businesses, write books, do political projects, and then work like that, run for office under a few different banners and all different kinds of things. So for me personally, it's been a pretty exciting and positive kind of adventure. I've had challenges and losses, but also a lot of victories, and helped a lot of people live better lives, I think, and done a lot of good through this campaign. Especially with our Get Your Drugs Tested project, which has been going on for the last 5 years or so, and really grew into something much bigger and more fantastic than I ever really expected when we when we started it. We've now become the busiest free street drug analysis center in the world and help tens of thousands of people make better decisions and more informed decisions about what they want to put in their body and the substances they're using. So, I mean, there wasn't any one single incident, I don't think, that's led me to that, but just a lot of different incidents over the years that have just showed me that. When we started off this campaign in the late or early 1990s, you couldn't buy a bong or a pipe in Canada really easily anyways. They were illegal. Grow books and High Times magazines and things like that were all prohibited and quite difficult to get. And we've come a long way since then, but we've still got a long way to go. And there's plenty of people in the cannabis community who see cannabis and recognize that the prohibition of cannabis is harmful and failed, but don't really extend that to other substances. And they'll say, well, but heroin and meth, these are very dangerous and harmful things, and they should be banned. But cannabis is safe and helpful and should be allowed. And I understand the logic of that, but the reality is that it's prohibition itself that makes these substances more dangerous and often perverts them from their natural forms. And in some way, I think of like fentanyl or some of these things. They're kind of like the spice of cannabis. Cannabis, you get the spice product, which isn't really real cannabis, but can actually be quite harmful and deadly on its own. But sort of a substitute for cannabis when you can't get it because it's cheaper and easier to make, but it has lots of those harms. And I believe in a legal system that people tend towards the safer, milder forms of these substances, and that it's prohibition that puts them towards the more harmful and deadly versions, often that are replacements of the more natural forms that become harder to get. So, yeah, I've seen a lot and learned a lot over the years, but nothing I've seen or learned has ever convinced me of anything other than the war on drugs is incredibly harmful, and it's time for it to come to an end for the benefit of all humans and all civilization and our advancement as a species. We need to put aside this terrible war on drugs, these terrible prohibition policies, which are just, like we've been saying, just causing so much harm and death and destruction in Canada and all around the world.
Yeah.
I have to agree. And, it's not like it's getting any better. It's just constantly, exponentially getting worse. And, like now, to begin with, it was like, oh my God, there's fentanyl in the heroin. Then it's like, oh my God, there's carfentanil in the fentanyl in the heroin. Oh, now there's benzos in the carfentanil in the fentanyl in the heroin. Now there's trank in the, and the safe
absolutely.
supply stops that. A lot of people see the. Go
ahead, yeah. I was gonna say when I first started doing this in like the early 1990s, there was considered to be a drug poisoning crisis in British Columbia then. There was about one person a day dying from an overdose or drug poisoning in British Columbia. And this was considered a major problem, right? And so the NDP government at the time had the chief coroner of British Columbia do a big report. He traveled all around British Columbia, talked to tens of thousands of people, had all these town halls and seminars and discussions, and came to the same conclusions back then that all the experts come to now, that prohibition is causing these harms and that we need legalization and regulation and safe supply. But that was one death a day. If we got back to that now, if now in British Columbia the death rate dropped to one a day, they would consider that a huge success and problem
they'd
solved.
They'd be dancing in the government.
They'd say problem solved, but the reality is that in itself was a crisis, an avoidable crisis caused by prohibition, and it's only gotten so much worse since then. And so it shows to me that how out of whack we've got, how far we've gotten, that what was once considered a major crisis would now be considered a solution compared to how bad things have gotten now. And of course, we've had decriminalization of small amounts of a limited number of substances here in British Columbia, which has just been overturned. And they're blaming overdose deaths and poisonings and chaos on this decriminalization, which started fairly recently. But of course, this problem's been going on for years and years and decades. And of course, in jurisdictions without decriminalization, like right next door in Alberta, things are just as bad, if not worse there. And, decrimin itself is not going to really solve anything. But the point is, criminalization doesn't solve anything either and makes it worse. And the default for any substance should be decriminalization and non-criminalization of anything, unless you show there's a benefit to penalizing people from possessing or having that. And there's been none of that with prohibition and with our current laws. But they've just overturned this and gone back to criminalization in Vancouver or in British Columbia here. And it's some of our political leaders, they will, I've seen this before in my career, where they try to do the right thing or they'll move towards a better policy, but as soon as there's any kind of pushback or challenge, they just cave because they don't know how to talk about the issue. So, our politicians in British Columbia, they don't know how to defend decriminalization. They don't know how to explain these issues. And so they try to put this policy in place. There's a few speed bumps on it, and they just cave entirely and push back on it instead of understanding how to defend it, how to tweak it, how to put better rules in place. But there's an argument being made that decriminalization is the cause of all these problems in British Columbia. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. But decriminalization isn't really the solution either. It's part of the solution, but the real solution is replacing the drug supply with a legal one. And that is difficult to understand. And we've got this weird situation where instead of doing what I think should be done, which is legalizing and selling these substances to people, they'll give them away to certain small numbers of people. And I don't really think, in some cases you need to be given stuff for free for whatever reason, but I don't really think giving people free things is the right way to go. For the most part, drug users are happy to pay for the substances they want to use. We didn't end, a criminalization of cannabis with free cannabis for everybody. Like, you can grow your own, you can produce your own, you can share it, and certainly the taxes are too high. But I do think people should be paying for these things if they're going to be using them, right? But the reality is, we're pushing back on this. It's going to be years again before we get another opportunity to move forward on decriminalization again in British Columbia, and we really got to go beyond that. But I think one of the important lessons for us, we saw this with cannabis also, it's not going to be politicians coming to our rescue. It's going to be us as activists at the grassroots level making these changes happen, and then forcing our politicians to lag along and come along behind. And this happened with cannabis, right? It was years after bong shops were all over the country and the police had given up on raiding bong shops. But the law against bongs and pipes didn't actually change until legalization in 2018. We had many years of pipes and bongs still being illegal in Canada, but the law being ignored. And the same thing with seeds, and then with seed banks, and then with dispensaries and cannabis sales, and ultimately open sales. And none of that was given to us by a government. All of that was taken by activists making those changes, starting off in some of the bigger cities, but ultimately spreading all across the country. Many people got raided and arrested and penalized for that, but the movement kept going and kept growing. And we're going to see the same thing with other things too. We're seeing it now with psychedelics, and certainly our shop is one of the leaders in that, but not the only ones. There's plenty of places across Canada with dispensaries, mushroom shops and things. Those fun guys in Ontario are very active. They've been raided and attacked and keep opening new shops and keep pushing back on that. I got raided once, and that was pretty terrible, but those guys get raided all the time and somehow manage to keep pushing back, right? So certainly not just me by any means doing this. I'm the only guy putting my name and my face out there in that sense, that most of the other mushroom dispensary owners don't. They may be committed and maybe working hard, but they don't normally put their face and their name out there like I do. But I think this is going to be the solution. It's going to be us pushing ourselves. And, your viewers may or may not be familiar with the Drug User Liberation Front, a group in Vancouver that had been running a compassion club.
I was going to ask you about them.
Yeah, they've shut down now under intense pressure from the government and from the police after getting raided and having all kinds of legal conditions put on them. But they were doing great work providing a safe, reliable source of methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin for their members. And that maybe sounds outrageous to some people, but the reality is these people are using these substances anyways, and by having access to a reliable, safe supply, none of them died in that time period. None of them had any those kind of serious health problems that come around from this, and we need more of that. We need more people stepping up. They're coming. It's happening as well. These substances perceived as the hard drugs, this is the hardest ones to kind of get people's minds around. But I approach that from a different angle with the Coca Leaf Cafe, where we sell coca leaf and coca tea and things like that. And of course, coca is the leaf you make cocaine out of. And I believe cocaine should be legal, but I also believe that in a system where coca leaf and cocaine were just as legal as coffee beans and caffeine, we would use them in similar ways. And so, you can go snort caffeine if you want to. And some people do snort caffeine and use caffeine in kind of unorthodox ways. But the reality is 99.999% of caffeine users, they don't want to snort caffeine, even though it's cheap and accessible and easy to get. They'd much rather drink coffee or energy drinks or things like that. And in countries where coca leaf is legal and available, the vast majority of people who chew coca leaf or drink coca tea, they have no desire to move on to other substances or to anything else. And if Canada fully legalized cocaine in all of its forms, this would not mean everyone started snorting cocaine all the time. It would mean that people started drinking coca drinks and coca teas and things like that. And that's really, what I think is more natural. You don't need to prohibit, we didn't need to ban caffeine powder to stop anybody from snorting caffeine. We just make safer, milder forms available. That's what people really want to have. And so, and there's another example of something called Doda tea. And Doda tea is made from dried opium poppies. And you get some dried opium poppies, grind them into a powder, add hot water, and let it steep. And you've got kind of a mild opium tea. And this is pretty popular in the Southeast Asian community in Canada, especially out west, but all across the country. And widely used. And then in the early 2000s, the police decided they were going to crack down on this. And they actually had to convince Health Canada. They would send samples of this Doda tea to Health Canada. And Health Canada would say, we can't find any opium in there. The opium level is so low, we can't even find it. And the police said they had to send someone to Health Canada and pressure them into changing their tests so they could find some opium in there to allow the police to do this crackdown. And of course, they start raiding shops that are selling Doda tea. They start going after people bringing in small quantities of Doda tea. What happens? 5 years later, 10 years later, massive heroin problem in the Southeast Asian community. And I read interviews with people who talk about, hey, I'm a truck driver. I used to drink Doda tea. Help me with my pain, help me get to sleep. Now it's gone. Now I'm injecting heroin. Now I'm using fentanyl because I can't get heroin. Now my life is all fucked up and my family is in chaos and things are really bad and I'm worried I'm going to die. Well, that person was fine drinking Doda tea, but now they've been pushed by prohibition into these really hard, more difficult substances to use responsibly, more potentially deadly substances. I say bring back the Doda tea, bring back the coca tea, bring back these options for people that are safer, that have historical benefits and health benefits, and that are the more natural, easier way to use these things, right? But prohibition pushes people to the harder forms, right? Prohibition can push people away from cannabis towards spice, which can be more available. That pushes people away from opium tea and towards heroin and fentanyl. If you think about it, it's very odd that it's easier to buy cocaine and fentanyl than it is to buy coca tea and opium tea, or even opium. It doesn't really make any sense. Shouldn't a good drug policy make it easier to access the milder, safer forms and harder to access the more risky and dangerous forms? But our drug policy does the opposite. It makes it so the only forms that are available are the most deadly, harmful forms of these substances, and the more natural forms are impossible to get, right? You can buy cocaine in 15 minutes in any big city, but I'm the only place in North America where you can walk in and buy coca leaves. And even I have trouble getting coca leaves in, right? So it just shows how these laws have the opposite effect of what you intend. And we saw this during alcohol prohibition, where getting a glass of beer or a cup of wine was impossible during alcohol prohibition, but getting bathtub gin and drinks with alcohol with methanol and poisonous things in it was very easy to get and caused a lot of harm and a lot of deadly results, right? And so we've seen this over and over again, but we can't seem to learn as a society what the truth is about these policies. We seem to keep going back over and over again over these terrible policies and recreating them to our detriment. So that's where I stand and what I'm working on and the change we're trying to make.
Wow.
Boom.
That's pretty damn awesome, man. Pretty deep.
Yeah, mic drop. Yeah. So you literally were just a young fella who saw this and got and said that you needed to make change. It wasn't something happened to you. You just saw the wrong things happening and needed to change them.
I will say that for the most part, a lot of people that I meet who become activists, they usually do so because of a personal reason, right? And that makes sense. I believe a lot of different things, but the ones you really work on and become active for, those are the things that affect you personally and that you have a deeper belief in, right? And so, it's not unsurprising that that LGBTQ people are at the forefront for fighting for rights for LGBTQ people. It doesn't mean other people don't believe in it. Others may become activists, but those who are really most affected by it become the people who lead the front lines. And I've met a lot of people who have become involved in cannabis because they or someone they love has a need for medical cannabis. That's often a turning point for people when they see the benefit and they can't access it for them or their child or their parent or someone in their family. Or often it's the case that this person or someone they love has been adversely affected by a prohibition and has been arrested or gone to jail or been penalized or lost their children or their job for some reason, and that motivates them to want to get involved and get changed. But for me, it wasn't really like that. For me, it was more of an idealistic kind of thing. I've suffered challenges from being an activist, but it wasn't anything like that turned me into an activist. I started doing this because I believed in it and because it just seemed like the right path for me to go on as a young person. And I don't regret any of it, but that's my story. I came into it from a slightly different way, but some are motivated by idealistic issues and some are motivated by things that have happened to them and this and that. And I'm not sure it matters necessarily what brought you into this movement, but we've all got to push this movement together. And whatever the reason we come into it is, we got to work together and make these changes happen in our society. What we do, I say what we do in Vancouver resonates across Canada. What we do in Canada resonates around the world. This is a thing that affects every country on earth. Every city and town on earth is affected by this in different ways. These policies are very difficult for any country to change on their own. We complain about cannabis legalization's flaws in Canada, but we also got to recognize that we are the only country on earth, other than, I guess, Uruguay, that has full legalization at the federal level. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. Of course, it's going to suck and have all these flaws and problems. We're the only country that's done this at the beginning, right? We're not going to be able to get it perfect the first time as the only country. It's going to take a lot of other countries doing this too and moving forward kind of together. And if any one country goes too far, they can be punished by other countries. Canada would not have been able to legalize without many American states doing it first and weakening the sort of moral authority of America to tell everybody else how to run their drug laws and their prohibition laws when their own states are decriminalizing, right? So it's got to happen at the same time or in sequence to a lot of different countries all around the world. No one wants to go too far on this, or they become a global pariah, right? So it's very challenging. And we got to recognize that when we look for these changes and be aware that nobody can make this perfect. It's going to take a lot of countries doing things, different ways to get to where we are. And we are still many years, if not decades and decades away from really seeing the end of this war.
Yeah, I got to agree there.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see it started. It's nice to know there's warriors at the forefront that are, that's one of the things I always sat there and admired about you. I always work in the background, I don't like playing that whack-a-mole game. I tend to get whacked. But I notice, you're out there in the forefront. You're putting your face and your name out there, and you're standing behind your convictions. I see the news put out their different little stories, and a lot of times they try to make you look like not a very good person in their stories. And, as a person that has a couple of daughters in fentanyl addiction on the downtown east side, I have to say I completely appreciate everything you do. And through that, I've learned to understand what decriminalizing drugs actually means and the pressure that it takes away. And if we could make that happen on a national scale, then there'd be a better chance of making healing happen on a national scale.
Yeah, decrim is important, but ultimately it doesn't really solve the problems of prohibition, right? It takes the boot off of users and opens, allows them to lead a bit more of a normal life without being afraid of being arrested and penalized at any moment. But it doesn't really solve the problems of a safe drug supply. And that's really the key issue, right? Is having access to this. And to me, a safe drug supply doesn't just mean like fentanyl or crack or these things, right? Like a safe drug supply should go the whole gamut. And so, I support safe access to these things, but I also think If you've got someone who's an opiate user, for instance, who's using fentanyl, if they need safe fentanyl, okay, let them have some safe fentanyl. But maybe offer them some heroin or some opium tea or a really strong cannabis edible or some kratom or things like that are also safer options for a lot of people. And these things aren't available either, right? And so when we do make a safe supply available, it's often only the most strong kind of forms, right? We offer hydromorphone tablets and things like that. And I fully support that. That should be allowed. But why are we not offering other alternatives? Why isn't kratom part of the conversation? Most Canadians aren't aware of what kratom is. We sell it at our shops, and it really helps a lot of people that are opiate users have a safer option, right? And offering things like Dota tea and opium tea and things like that should also be available. I've talked to drug users who told me, this was a few years ago. I met a guy who uses heroin when he's in Vancouver. He said he went and lived in Vietnam for many years. When he was there, he stopped using heroin and started drinking opium tea. He said he found it fine for what he needed. When he came back to Canada, he couldn't get opium tea anymore, so he went back to heroin. Now, I'm not sure how many users are like that, whether it's 10% or 90% that could switch from their current substance to a milder form. But whatever the number is, they should have that option, right? But there's no safe opium tea supply going on. There's no safe kratom supply coming from the government. Kratom is still prohibited. There's no safe, try some extra strong cannabis edibles as an alternative. These things aren't going to work for everybody, but they're going to work for some people, and they should have that option, right? And I believe if we have these milder forms, many folks would never move to the harder forms in the first place. No one's going to be drinking bathtub gin if they've got nice beer and wine available, right? Same kind of situation.
I agree. On that note, we've hit the halfway point, so we've got to take a break and let our sponsors have their moment. So we'll be right back shortly after our sponsors here on paceradio.net with our awesome guest, Dana Larsen. See you in June.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Are you looking to get your medical cannabis grow license? Limestone City Hydroponics can help patients through the process of obtaining their license to grow medical cannabis. What's that? You don't have a doctor? If you meet the medical criteria, Limestone City Hydroponics has a nurse practitioner who can assess and provide medical cannabis prescriptions. What are you waiting for? Contact Limestone City Hydroponics at limestonecityhydroponics.ca or call them at 613-548-0420.
PACE Radio is the People Advocating Cannabis Education Radio Network.
Legacy 420 have an awesome array of cannabis-infused beverages, from pop to Nature's Nectar's teas, all in amazing flavors. What a selection! We even have a delicious mango-infused juice, and let me tell you, it's delicious.
Everything is infused in-house, so we buy our syrup from the same place where everybody else buys their syrup for their pop, and the infusion is done in the lab. It's all canned here, labeled here, produced 100% on Tyndonega.
We have two lines of drinks. One is called our Nature's Nectar. That was our original line that we came out with, and then we also have a line under the Red E brand. We have them in 10 milligrams, 30 milligram, and 60 milligram cans.
What a great selection for a get-together with friends or after a long day. Remember, if you want to wet your whistle with on-site lab-tested products, come see your trusted partner. Legacy 420 out on your road.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Good day. We're back on the Mushie Moment, live with our awesome guest, Dana Larsen, and my wicked co-host, Reverend Cindy.
So we're back. There's always a ton of stuff to talk about. First off, I just want to say that I have even more respect for you now than I did before, knowing that you're just here to help. You're literally you got into it to help, and I think that's amazing. And for somebody that it has personally benefited, myself, thank you. Not to mention, as Steve mentioned, his daughters, and that opens us up to a whole world of humans that we've met, especially Steve, and is very close to. So, so the most recent thing that you were in the news for, there were two things. The raid was one, but the other thing that I got the biggest kick out of was your generosity to the politicians in your area at Christmas time. I mean, I thought that was beautiful. The cards that you sent out with the golden teachers.
Yeah, well, we got raided in November last year, November 1st, and I wasn't really expecting that, although maybe I should have, but there's a lot of other mushroom dispensaries in the city, and we're the only ones being hit by the police. Of course, we do a lot of things other mushroom dispensaries don't do. We sell LSD and DMT and kratom and Coca Leaf, and I think actually that raid was about the Coca Leaf. They don't tell you when they come in what triggered it, but looking back, the police said they started investigating us in June last year. Well, in May last year, there was a story about this company in British Columbia that got licensed to import coca leaves to make cocaine for research purposes. And this became a big story, even though it's, a very small amount of cocaine, probably to be given to rats and things like that for research. But we got tied into that story. And of course, being the blabbermouth that I am, I was in the news talking about how we import coca leaves from South America for our cafe. And under the law in Canada, coca leaves are considered the same as cocaine as a product. They're both Schedule 1. So here I am in the news talking about how I'm importing Schedule 1 drugs for my cafe, and I think that's what actually triggered the raid, right? But I'm not really sure. They don't really tell us, but it was pretty devastating. They emptied out all three of our shops. We lost a lot of money, a lot of product. It was very challenging to us. We were about to expand the Get Your Drugs Tested program, and that got delayed by several months as we had to rebuild and pay off debts and go through some very serious challenges that we're now kind of coming out of. But after that raid, I wanted to respond, and I thought about, I had this idea, maybe I should send some mushrooms and coca leaves to the members of the legislature. And I was pretty nervous about doing that. And I'm not always, some of these things come off as just an easy thing, but I wasn't really sure this was a good idea or not, right? But I thought about it, and I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I wrote a nice letter to our members to the members of the legislature in British Columbia, inviting them to come to our dispensary, come to get your drugs tested, meet the kind of clients that we have, see the work that we're doing. Maybe we'll change your mind about us. And I included a gram of mushrooms, the golden teacher mushrooms, and one single coca leaf for each of them. And a lot of them, a couple of them texted me that I know. I mean, I know a lot of these guys, especially in the NDP. I ran for the leadership of the NDP in 2011 against John Horgan and Adrian Dix and Mike Farnworth, names that are familiar to anybody who follows British Columbia politics, right? But I sent out the sample, and I actually, the most over-the-top response came from a member of the BC United Party, formerly the BC Liberals, a woman named Eleanor Sturko. And she's the addictions critic for the United Party. And she was very over the top and opened up the parcel with gloves on and called the police and said that she thought that probably, it could be that somebody died or somebody was murdered over this coca leaf, and that that she didn't want to be involved in something that could have resulted in death and murder. And of course, the coca leaves are legal in Peru and Bolivia and Colombia for people there. They're not supposed to export them out of the country, but they're grown in large quantities legally. These aren't cartel leaves. They're not sending me, the whole thing is ridiculous, right? But Eleanor Sturkos, actually, she's got kind of a compelling story, right? I mean, she as a young woman, she wanted to help people. She joined the RCMP, became a police officer, was exposed to some terrible things and dead bodies and murders and stuff, which kind of messed her up, gave her PTSD. She started drinking excessively to deal with her PTSD, descended into alcoholism, eventually got her to act together, went sober, stopped drinking, ran for office, and became a member of the legislature. But the thing is, she didn't have to ban alcohol for anybody else to stop using alcohol. We didn't need to prohibit and punish alcohol drinkers for her to be able to get off of alcohol. But her lesson from this is that all these substances are bad, and that it's triggering for me to send her a mushroom because it's a drug and everything. And of course, a lot of people find mushrooms very helpful to stop using alcohol and other substances, and very beneficial to understand themselves better, to deal with the PTSD and trauma and underlying issues.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she would probably benefit very much from having a mushroom experience, or even from microdosing, right? But you kind of need that pushback also to make a point, right? So her over-the-top reaction got a lot of media, got me a chance to be in the news, to talk about these issues, to explain there's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to a magic mushroom, nothing to be afraid of when it comes to a coca leaf. In fact, both of these things have centuries and millennia, really, of cultural, social, spiritual, medicinal use by millions and millions of people who find them beneficial and positive plants and then very good for you. And so it got me a chance to talk about that and bring that forward. And it was kind of fun as well, and kind of teasing them all a little bit. You come raid my store, well, I'll show you. I'm going to send you a gram of mushrooms and a coca leaf in the mail, right? I mean, as a retribution, it's pretty gentle. I'm not really getting anybody. I'm just trying to sort of tease them. So I'm still here. We're not going anywhere.
It made me quite laugh, actually.
Right. Yeah, that was the point, to have kind of a lighthearted moment in a way out of something that was really quite serious, because that raid was really, where we lost a lot of employees who didn't want the risk of working for us anymore, or felt things were going to happen. And like I said, we had to delay our Get Your Drugs Tested expansion, which I think is a life-saving, important project. And it wasn't easy, right? But
thank you for putting that. Thank you for putting that together. That's how I get my
revenge, is I send them free gifts and embarrass them by sending them free stuff in the mail.
I thought it was awesome. And one thing that I did note, because I read that story and I kind of was like, wow, this is way over the top. But then I was also subject to going to the Richmond City Hall to speak on a vote about maybe putting in a safe usage site at the hospital here. And I got mobbed there, and it blew up, because a lot of people think like that lady did. There's a lot of programming around things where a lot of it is almost absurd. If you're in the community, you can see the absurdity in a lot of it. But they run a program that's so heavy in fear. And it's like, well, we don't want the drugs here. We don't want the drugs here. And what they miss is the drugs are already here. You can't stop them. They're already here. So let's make them safe for the people using them, so that we're not burying our kids. I've got so many friends that have already buried their kids. I'm an extremely lucky man. Mine are still alive. But if there was a safe supply, those people wouldn't be dead. So I'm a big advocate for that myself, and I thank you for for taking your hard-earned money and putting it towards getting drugs tested, so that people like my daughters can stay alive.
Well, there's a public perception among people that of what a drug user looks like or what they are, and it is a very inaccurate perception. And even the phrase drug user, of course, everybody uses drugs in some form or another, right? From coffee to cannabis to tobacco to alcohol to whatever else.
Aspirin.
Drugs. So when we say a drug user in that context, we really mean opiate users, right? Typically, we mean that substance. We're not really referring to pot smokers or to psychedelic users when we say drug users, even though all those things apply. But really, the reality is that drug users or users of banned drugs are the last group you're legally allowed to hate in Canada, and that the government is promoting a hate campaign against, right? I mean, all the same things they used to say about gay people, they used to say about black people and racialized people, they say about drug users. Or after your kids, they need treatment, especially like the gay community, and the way they were treated and the kind of rhetoric that was used against them is very, very similar to that's now used against drug users. And often the same groups, right? I mean, if you go back a few decades, the RCMP, for instance, put out a statement that they opposed legalization of cannabis and legalization of homosexuality because they both lead to degradation of the individual. So they tied those two issues together as the police, right? That these are both things that are the same to us, being gay and being a drug user, being a pot smoker at the time, but more broadly, being a drug user. This is both deviant behavior. You just need some treatment to be like everybody else. We just got to get you in some mandatory treatment, and this idea that drug users need treatment. What the treatment is for drug use, I have no idea. And no one else really does either, because there isn't really any treatment, because the whole treatment complex is full of bullshit. And most of what we call treatment is really abusing young people, often violently, sexually, emotionally. And we see this in these treatment programs that are often loci of some terrible behavior and really traumatizing stuff, often with kind of a religious overtone to it. But some people need help with their substance use and with those issues, but usually it's about getting a better relationship with that substance, and it is about this idea of treatment. And of course, we didn't solve the mass death crisis caused by alcohol prohibition with forced treatment for alcoholics, right? We've solved the mass death problem of alcohol prohibition with a safe legal supply of alcohol. And that's the solution ultimately here as well, right? So, I'm not saying some people don't need help or therapy when it comes to their substance use. Some people need help and therapy when it comes to their sexuality and with the way they behave sexually, right? That they act out or do things that are risky. They need some therapy and counseling so they can deal with those kind of issues. But that's not the same as saying that everyone who's gay is immoral and messed up in the head and needs treatment to be made straight again. Nor is everybody who uses opiates or illegal substances need treatment. They're not all messed up in the head. They're mostly, for the vast majority, are normal people who look and act like everybody else. Our perception of drug users is that they are the people living in the downtown east side who are homeless and who are mentally ill, but often it's the other way around, that becoming homeless leads you to problematic drug use because it's more difficult to use things responsibly when you're in that kind of situation. And of course, prohibition makes it very, very difficult to use something in a responsibly limited kind of way. There's nowhere to go use it, no knowing what's in the substance. There's all these issues in British Columbia claiming that drug users are using in playgrounds and public areas, which isn't really true, but also like, you got to create safe, legal indoor spaces to be allowed to use these things if you're going to eliminate use outdoors. In fact, that's the same thing with gay people too, There used to be people in parks and stuff and certain areas, you'd go there at night and all the gay people would be hanging out there because there's nowhere else legally for them to go, right? So they would end up going to public areas to meet other people in their community and to socialize and do the things they wanted to do. And you had the same kind of problems, right? There was like, the gays are in the parks and they're all doing gay stuff in the parks and we got to get them out of the parks. And like, that was a real thing, but it wasn't because being gay intrinsically makes you want to go to a park to meet other people. It's because that's the only place you could go. Everywhere else, you're going to be ostracized or punished or beaten or criminalized for being who you are. So we need
I remember that period. That was the period where gay bashing was going on here in Vancouver.
Right across the country.
To me, I mean, it's not a perfect parallel. Obviously, there's differences, and I don't want to draw out the parallel too much, but I think there is a real valid comparison there, right? That when you push things down and you don't allow people to do things in a natural way, it becomes unnatural. Like it becomes public. It becomes uncontrolled. Same with alcohol prohibition. During alcohol prohibition, public drinking increased. People were drinking in public all the time because there was nowhere else to go. And so people were drinking in public, having alcoholism issues in public, drinking shitty, rot gut bathtub gin that was poisonous, dying in large quantities, all in public. And when alcohol prohibition ended and people could drink in private spaces again, all those problems were drastically reduced, right? And so, this idea now that they're trying to portray it as decriminalization as the cause of these drug poisoning deaths and the cause of all these problems. No, decriminalization
They were all happening
is not
already.
Or the solution either, right? It's more, we got to go deeper than that.
No, and the drugs keep getting more toxic. What is it? Xylazine, trank, and there's another one now in there as well, along with the benzo.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. The fentanyl's not even clean. People come into our place they think they bought fentanyl, and like you're saying, it's not fentanyl, it's carfentanil, or it's got xylazine in it, or other things as well. And that's a natural result of the prohibition market. The more we clamp down, the harder we make it for the quote-unquote drug dealers, the lower the quality gets and the more problems everybody has. And ideally if you just had a totally unregulated, uncontrolled market with no prohibition, that'd be better than what we have now. But the ideal one is a regulated system with proper rules in place. If you buy something in a store and it's got a label on it, well, you want that label to accurately represent what's in the product, right? So we need rules like that in place, right? Those kind of controls. But beyond that, prohibition is just causing, like I always say, it causes all the problems that it claims to solve. We've seen this with alcohol prohibition. We've seen this with other prohibitions and other types of cultures and behaviors, and it's not the way to go. Proper regulation makes sense, but it's hard for a lot of people to see that, and I do understand that. If your perception of a drug user is well as a homeless person on the downtown east side, that's what a drug user is, and that person needs treatment or help in some way. Like, I'm sympathetic with that ideology, but you're greatly mistaken as to what a drug user is and how to deal with these problems, right? And so we got to show people that, and it's a challenge. And the media, these days especially, is so biased against this, right? The National Post has been running so many articles, and these Adam Zivo and these other so-called journalists just hammering again and again, with nothing on the other side really be getting out there in a public way about the truth of this. We saw this with cannabis for years, where the perception of cannabis users was also very negative and stereotypical. And now we've gone beyond that, because most people, if they don't use pot themselves, they know someone else who uses it, and they can see that person's actually pretty normal, and so their perception of that goes away. But just like it was with being gay, there's a lot of drug users out there who don't want to come out as being drug users, right? And so your perception of a drug user is only the ones that are identified publicly, and those ones are the ones in the worst situations. Just like your perception of a gay person might be very stereotypical or very harmful, because the only ones you see are in the news or ones who act in certain ways. And you don't realize that you actually know a lot of gay people, but you can't tell they're gay because they're just like everybody else, because that's how it is. And the same with drug users. Most drug users, you can't pick out of a lineup because they look like everybody else, because they're just normal people, right? But they don't come out as drug users. Yeah, you don't
start on the downtown east side.
Yeah, but they don't admit it, right? They're not going to admit it, because what's the benefit? They're going to lose their job. They're going to lose their kids. They're going to lose everything they have. Their life's going to be ruined. So they're never going to come out and admit, yeah, I use heroin on the weekends. Yeah, I snort cocaine once in a while. No one is going to come out in public and say that, because the social and legal repercussions are so damaging. So as a result, people are left with stereotypes. The only ones that they see publicly are the ones that conform to those stereotypes. And it's going to require a lot of people to come out of the closet, and be open about this. But who wants to be the first one to do that? Not many people want to be the first one to come out of the closet, and this so much reminds me of other groups and of this history that we've gone through. And we got to see these parallels and make these changes.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's going to be a long, hard fight, but I think we got some good people doing the battle, and it's just kind of standing strong and dealing with the convictions, and both the convictions, your conviction and any that might come along from the authorities.
Our convictions too, right? And those are challenging. And that's part of my work, I guess, is try to show the plant origins of these things, and try to show people what coca leaf is and what opium poppies are, and why these plants are so important to the cultures that use them and revere them, and why, in many ways, what we call the war on drugs is a genocide, certainly a cultural genocide. When you go to someone in South America whose culture has used coca leaves since long before recorded history. And you say, well, the United Nations policy is to completely eradicate coca leaves from the face of the earth and drive this plant extinct. Well, that's kind of cultural genocide, and also like a real biological genocide to wipe out these useful plants. But really, you're trying to destroy a culture, an indigenous culture, and that's like, we shouldn't be doing that, right? And I think most people recognize that as a bad policy and rooted in just like the worst aspects of colonialism and these policies we got to really put behind. These laws came in over 100 years ago, and so many other policies and viewpoints and ideals from 100 years ago we have set aside, right? If you talked about women or racial groups or homosexuality or things the way they did a century ago, you'd be seen as a dinosaur. But you talk about drugs the way they did a century ago, and you are right up to current times, right? There's one policy left from that era that we got to change and that we got to set aside and forget, but has just somehow become deeply embedded in our culture. Boom.
Yeah,
I'm glad you decided to come on our show, my friend. This is awesome. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It's good to talk about these issues.
It's amazing to hear you speak. You have a lot of passion when you speak, and these are very important words. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's been happening in Ontario lately, but Toronto, the mayor is behind the decriminalization of drugs there. But she's working, she believes that, recovery centers and places where these people can go, as you were saying, is definitely what is most important. So I it's reaching. Because, they are looking at Vancouver. So what Vancouver is, had done before they rescinded it, is reaching across the country. And, I drove last summer from BC to Nova Scotia, and, I watch the issue in Vancouver grow every time I come out for a visit. And I've got to say, I don't know if you've ever been to Thunder Bay, but they're probably their rivals what is going on in the downtown east side. Almost the entire city has been, taken up by homelessness, and, the bad drugs are running rampant. When I was in Thunder Bay, the ambulances and the police cars on the constant go.
It's very expensive too, having all those ambulance trips. Aside from the human cost, people dying all the time, it's incredibly expensive to deal with this as an emergency and send all these emergency places out all the time to deal with the results of prohibition.
And the first responders that are getting messed up because of it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And of course, there's harms that come from a drug poisoning, even if you don't die. There's often can be psychological and mental and brain and physical issues that come out of that. So it's not just a question of, overdose death numbers going up or down, because there's a lot of repercussions from drug poisonings that don't necessarily mean death, but still mean lifelong health issues and that kind of things, right? So it's deeper than that. And it is in every city and town across the country and really around the world in different ways. This is an issue, right? And these are important issues, and people are suffering. And it's easy to blame the substances, but the reality is prohibition is what makes these substances much more dangerous. And homelessness also leads people to these kind of things. If you're homeless, you got to be on the watch a lot of the time, especially as a woman, but as anybody. You don't want to get raped or murdered or have your possessions stolen and robbed. So a drug that helps you stay up later at night, well, that can be kind of useful for you maybe, right? So maybe you decide to take some meth to stay awake tonight so you don't fall asleep in a dangerous situation. Maybe you're in pain because you're sleeping rough and you don't have a home. And being chronic pain is a definite result of being homeless, right? Number one result of being homeless, you're in pain all the time. You're not sleeping properly. You're not eating properly. You're not sleeping in a nice cozy mattress in a quiet room. You're sleeping on the sidewalk or in a park where it's noisy and problematic. Someone offers you something to relieve that pain, even if you know that thing is dangerous and might cause you long-term issues. pain makes you crazy. Chronic pain is terribly psychologically damaging for people. The opportunity to be relieved of pain for a short time becomes very enticing. And that's very normal and natural, and a decision we would all make in that same situation. We'd be doing the exact same thing. So often it's the homelessness that leads to problematic drug use and not the other way around. We see folks using drugs in a public area. You go, oh, well, they're there because they use drugs and now they're homeless. That happens sometimes, sure, but by and large, it's the other way around. They became homeless for other reasons, economic reasons, which can lead to problematic drug use, or even just public drug use because you don't have a place to do it in private. So now you're doing it on the street, right? So the cause and effect are often reversed in our perception of these things, right? And that's a key issue that I think gets missed a lot of the time. What causes this and what the effect? They get it backwards, right? Homelessness itself causes a lot of problematic drug use, and prohibition only makes that worse.
Yeah.
Oh, we're at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's been an hour. Do you have anything that you wish to add on to what you've already said before we say our goodbyes? You've had
our websites at the bottom of the screen. So, getyourdrugtested.com. We've got all our test results online. We accept samples really from anywhere in the world by mail and drop in Vancouver. And we've hit over 65,000 tests. So we're very busy. Of course, mushroomdispensary.com, cannabisdispensary.ca. If you're in Canada looking for safe access to these substances, we've got you covered from our websites. If you want to find out about me, DanaLarsen.com. And I got a YouTube channel at Dank Arson because we burned down the Dank.
Oh, yes, I missed that one.
I do some shows on YouTube as well. I'm not too busy on YouTube, but I've got a few things out there and more to come. So those are some places you can check out my work and see what I'm up to, what I'm doing. And I guess PotheadBooks.com for my Harry Pothead and the Marijuana Stone and a few of my other fun and educational books about Canada and cannabis and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I own a few of those. Are awesome books.
There you go.
Well, I guess we have to say goodbye. It kind of bums me out because I'd like to hear more. So hopefully we can get you back on the show. That would be incredibly awesome. And, maybe we'll talk a little more about your dispensary and stuff.
Yeah, always lots to talk about, and I can just go off. But it's been a great hour. It flew by. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to coming back again sometime soon.
Thank you, Dana. We really appreciate you coming on.
All right, take care.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you from paceradio.net, streaming to you live everywhere here on The Mushie Moment with Dana Larsen, Rev Cindy, and myself, Steve. Have an awesome day.
Bye.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20 is so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420 enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, They offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.